Before we get into the grow room any further, I wanted to talk a little bit about the mushroom life cycle. Understanding the mushroom life cycle is going to put you more in tune with these mushrooms and give you a better understanding of how these things are growing and exactly where you need to be at during each stage of the life. So, pinning, fruiting, and flushes are three things that you're going to hear when we're referring to the mushrooms growing in the grow room. And all three of them do specifically have different meanings, although they are all intertwined. So, pinning is these baby mushrooms right when you cut the bag open, when you're starting to see what we call primordia form. That is pinning. Pinning and primordia, essentially the same thing. Fruiting is the formation of mushrooms in general. Once they're past the tiny primordia stage, then we'd be referring to these mushrooms as fruiting mushrooms, which is this stage here, which is the sexual reproductive portion of the mushroom life cycle. And it is also the shortest portion of the life cycle. In many mushrooms, lesser than 5% of the total life cycle is spent in the actual mushroom phase. So flushes are the individual growth cycles. So the blocks here that we've sent you will yield up to 4 pounds over multiple flushes. So they'll yield usually a good amount of mushrooms up to 2 flushes. Your first flush will usually be large, you'll get a couple of pounds. And then your second flush, you'll get anywhere between, a half a pound, 3/4 of a pound. A lot of commercial growers do not second flush just because it takes up a lot of space and you're essentially resetting the block from the beginning of your cycle whenever you cut it open again. If you have the space, it's a great way to maximize your yields is by second flushing. So do not count out second flushing, but also understand that it's going to really eat up your space, and it also increases the probability of contaminations. I've seen it successful with some of the farms that we work with when they're using a separate fruiting tent. Some of them just take the blocks straight up outside and they'll fruit them in another spot outdoors where they're able to be a little more dirty and not so tidy per se. So flushes, you'll get 1 to 2 off of these blocks. But like when you're foraging, you get flushes of like chanterelles where they'll pop up here, they'll pop up there. Same kind of deal, same kind of phrase. So let's talk about what's actually going on and where we are at in this whole cycle here and what the actual outcome and spots mean. So when you receive your blocks, you're in the mycelium phase. The mycelium phase is this phase after the spores have mated, essentially. Spores are diploid, so it takes 2 spores to smack together and create a full genetic structure, very similar to humans. So the spores mate, they create this mycelium, which creates hyphae, which the hyphae eventually will come together in what we call hyphal knots and create primordia, and that's where your mushrooms are going to grow. And eventually the mushrooms grow, they release the spores, and the cycle continues on. So as growers, we're starting usually here in the mycelial phase. When we are doing lab work and working with cultures and different genetics, which can be fun, it just takes a lot of effort and a lot of time in being very specific with what you're doing. The spore phase is often not used. We're mostly doing tissue cultures and we're using one genetic code. So that's the difference between buying a tissue culture and buying spores. Spores have the ability to produce different genetics because you're giving these millions or billions of possible genetic outcomes with each different spore combination. So it's an interesting thing. And when I started, I made the mistake of buying spore syringes, and it was never the best and quickest way to get from A to Z. So we're trying to not deal with this phase at all. We do not want spores in our grow room. We do not want spores anywhere, ideally. That's why when we get to the harvesting spot here, we're going to talk about harvesting these things early and at the proper stage, because it is not worth letting them overgrow, where all we're doing is creating more work for ourselves in the future. So Primordia mushrooms, that's all good. This is a little mushroom life cycle review for you. If you were unaware of some of these things, I just wanted to fill you in. It's a good little module to know a little bit more about. So check it out. We're going to the grow room.